This is Dr. Wysong. This series of videos on the big questions of life will show where each one of us is led if we dare to leave behind preconceived ideas and see where reason and evidence lead. Personal weirdness. If you think back through your life, you probably recollect experiences that are in keeping with some of the examples cited in the previous chapters. I can lay claim to none of the extraordinary abilities, but I have experienced déjà vu, contagious yawns, anticipating phone calls, guessing the time, dowsing, and witnessing some unusual animal capabilities. I recently listened to a program on the radio about the development of rocketry. Werner von Braun was being discussed, and just before the speaker was going to state the year of his death, I tried to guess it. I thought 1977. And the commentator then said 1977. I knew nothing about his life. It impressed me very much. Here's another example of my amateur psychic abilities. My wife had been setting the alarm so she could get up early to see our daughter off to school. On this particular morning there was no school and thus no need for the alarm to go off. At about 4 a.m. I was lying awake going through the work I was going to try to accomplish for the day. I didn't want to get up because that would awaken her. She wasn't getting a lot of rest and I wanted her to sleep in. Then I remembered that she probably had the alarm set. So I slowly rolled out of bed and crept around to her side where the alarm clock rested on a nightstand within her reach. I moved quietly and listened to make sure her deep sleep breathing continued. When I got to the stand, I crouched so she could not see my silhouette if she were to awaken. I then reached for the clock to press in the little alarm off button. I hadn't made a sound. Everything was perfect. I was so clever. But as my hand was on the clock, silently searching in the dark for the button, I heard a stirring. The deep breathing stopped. I froze with my hand on the clock. Then, to my amazement, I felt her hand probing the top of my hand. She was searching for the alarm off button. She was going to get up and didn't want the alarm to awaken me. After surveying my hand for a moment, she slowly pulled hers back. I held my position with my hand still on the clock, hoping she would just fall back asleep. No such luck. Her hand returned, this time timidly feeling and squeezing this strange fleshly protuberance growing out of the top of her clock in the pitch black of the night. I thought by then that she was fully awake and knew it was my hand, so I grabbed hers in fun. Then all hell broke loose as she yanked her hand back and began screaming, kicking, and swinging. I got up and tried to quiet her, but she'd have nothing to do with that. She jumped out of bed, uttering expletives I dare not repeat here, but out the door she went, leaving me thankful that I had missed the full force of at least some of her swings. Boy, talk about good intentions gone bad. She returned in a few minutes after she had gathered herself, realized she was awake and that it was not an alien she had just encountered. I explained, and then we began to laugh ourselves silly. What an incredible nightmare for her to have experienced. We still laugh about it to this day, and I can't help but chuckle as I write this. Anyway, the point is that something went on between her mind and mine, unspoken, unheard, that made her hand meet mine in that particular instant, on that fateful morning, on top of the alarm clock. The probability of it happening by chance was just far too remote. Here's another instance of my wife and I being on the same wavelength. One winter, we made a snowboarding trip with kids and their friends to the Rockies. We were staying in a small apartment in a rather remote area. On an afternoon when the rest of the clan was away, I decided to walk into the mountains and find a place to lie down in the warm sun. I took no established path and set out up a hill facing south where the sun had melted all the snow. Several hundred yards away from the apartment, I found a nice secluded spot to soak up the wonderful sun on what was otherwise a pretty cold day. I drifted off into a little nap only to be awakened by the cracking of brush nearby. With the prospect of bear, I was quickly at full alert. Watching through the brush, I heard my name called. It was my wife, within 20 feet of me. I have no idea how she found me, and neither does she. She just says she went in the direction she thought I would be. She had 360 degrees of option, and she chose the precise one. Just before this book was going to press, another remarkable event happened to me. On and off for several days, John, an old grade school and sports buddy, came to mind. While in the middle of work one afternoon, the thought came to me to phone him, even though I had not seen or heard from him in over 30 years. At first I put it aside. I was busy, you know how that is. Besides, I wasn't sure if he still lived in the city where we grew up. But the urge persisted and welled up in me like a duty. So I uncharacteristically put my work aside and searched out a phone book. There was his number. So I called, somewhat nervous about what to say after all this time. His wife answered, and we briefly exchanged some pleasantries. Then I asked if I might speak to John. Silence. Then she said, "John just died a few days ago." I was shocked. I expressed my condolences and got the details of the illness that had consumed him over the last week or so. I felt terrible that I had not made contact with him when I first felt the urge, which coincided with his dying. This extraordinary coincidence seems best explained, given the evidence in these and the following chapters, by assuming he had evidently brought me to mind during the time of his dire illness. Thanks for that, John. Sorry I did not reach out to you sooner. I miss you. Speaking of coincidences, I have worked on this book for over 15 years. During that time, hundreds of graphics were accumulated, and some got lost. When the book was about ready for press, I was told that the above graphic could not be found. The next morning, I received an email from my daughter, who is grown, living apart from me, and has no idea what I was working on. In that email was a link to the Lincoln-Kennedy similarities. She sent it to me and her friends because she thought it was interesting. The odds of that are so remote that there are no odds for it.
Thank you for listening. Keep in mind that solving the big questions requires foundations upon which truthful answers can be built. So please work through the series sequentially. This information has taken decades of research, thought, and writing. Aside from the peace of mind the solutions have brought me, the only reward I seek is hearing that it's helped you. Feel free to contact me with any comments or questions at asifThinkingMatters.com.